Welcome to the CEIBS China Knowledge Podcast, produced by the China Europe International Business School.
The next part, we're going to have another panel to discuss about the merger and acquisition and the generous return from the Chinese market. So the next panel will be moderated by Ms. David Percival, Managing Director of International Business Development at Deloitte. The panelists will be Mr. Frank Slevan, VP Sanpower Group Chairman, House of Fraser. We will have Mr. Xu Liangjiang, Chief Representative from Fosun Group, Lisbon and London offices, and also Professor Yuan from CEIBS. So, okay, now I'm going to turn over to David for the session.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming. My name is David Percival. I live and work in Shanghai for Deloitte. I've been in Shanghai for 8 years, 4 years for the UK government. I was actually a commercial director at World Expo, and Professor Yang mentioned the success of that project this morning. And it was, I would say that Deloitte done very well out of it, because 3 of the relationship managers in my team from that World Expo are now working for us, helping drive business between China and the UK. For Deloitte, I lead a team, a UK-centric team based in Shanghai that helps what we call the M&A corridor between Europe and China, and that's been interesting times. Many of us will know that companies like Pizza Express, Sunseeker, which Deloitte was heavily involved in, and of course House of Fraser we heard about. Those names of many of you know are now significantly Chinese invested. But I think there's a lot more we can learn about how to do deals between Europe and China, and a lot more that we can get better at, actually. I think for every successful deal, there's probably 20 or 30 that don't happen. So we've got a great panel together for you to ask some, their insight and experience of exactly how we can improve from, and perhaps they can give us some tips. So first of all, we have Frank Slevan, who's the SVP of Sanpower and the Chairman of House of Fraser. Frank, do you want to just give us 2 or 3 minutes on yourself?
Sure. Actually, I'm not just Chairman of House of Fraser, Chairman of Hamleys as well.
Okay.
The reason that's important is it's another Chinese invested company, as well as Chairman of Brookstone in North America, which is the 3rd Chinese invested company. So I have some perspectives here. House of Fraser is actually one of the oldest department stores in the UK. It was founded back in 1849, which I think was about 60 years before the first department store appeared in China. It has a, I would say, quite robust and long heritage. It is also now the largest Chinese invested company in the UK by numbers of employees. So we have about 16,500 full-time and part-time staff. It's about 6,500 of those are full-time, which makes us reasonably large and reasonably important. And what have we gained from this? And I think this is very important. The transaction closed in September of 2014, and in the subsequent years, we've actually reported 2 consecutive years in 15 and 16 of a return to profitability, right, after 10 years of losses, which I think is a very notable contribution. And why have we been able to do that? We've been able to do that because we've benefited from the stability that the Chinese ownership transfer has given us. It's given us stability in terms of not just the ownership structure, but also it's given us stability in relation to the financial strength that the Sanpower Group has brought to us. So this is something that we've benefited from that direction. The other direction, we've benefited from their ability to guide us into China. So we've opened our first department store, 425,000 square feet of space in Nanjing, which we opened in December of last year. It's really quite a spectacular location in the Xinjiang district of Nanjing, which is one of the, from a density of sales perspective, is one of the highest density retail locations in China. They also basically guided us away from thinking about tier 1 cities as being a primary focus. So they were the ones that guided us to second tier, third tier cities as being really more economically attractive to us. So we're going to be opening our second store in Suzhou in September of this year, and hopefully we'll have our third probably in Chongqing in the early part of 2018. So again, it's not just monodirectional, it's bi-directional flow of support and expertise. Oh, sorry. I thought I was speaking loudly enough anyway. From the back.
I think your mic might not.
That's all right. Usually I can just project, just throw my voice to the back of the room.
Interpreter can't pick you up.
Oh, the interpreter can't pick me up. Sorry about that. So if we think about the flow into China, again, it's given us not just the locational benefits in terms of guidance on what we can derive from third tier or second tier cities, but also that guidance through basic things such as brand registrations. How do we deal with customs? How do we deal with imports? How do we deal with logistics? A lot of the very basic things that UK companies, international companies looking to expand into China will concern themselves with. So having that strength of ownership and that direction clearly has been very beneficial. So we see it as being a symbiotic relationship. It's very interesting, the questions that were being answered by the previous panel. I probably would have been quite keen to answer quite a few of those, but we might get onto that in due course.
Yeah.
Because certainly some of the cultural questions I think are very interesting. I think it's overplayed, to be honest, because there is not in my mind a difference between a UK company being owned by a Chinese company or a UK company being owned by an American company. You still have to deal with differences of approach. I came through a global financial services background with stints at Citigroup and HSBC. And these were organizations that had, certainly when I ran HSBC's Asia Pacific global banking business, I was responsible for 23 countries around the Asia Pacific region, each one of those countries being different and the approach to them having to be different. The point about bringing on local management teams and empowering local senior executives to run the businesses that you've invested in, I think is very important. We certainly have very much benefited from that enlightened approach which Sanpower has adopted towards House of Fraser to Brookstone in the United States, and actually which CBanner has also adopted in relation to the operations of Hamleys in the UK. So anyway, we'll get on to that in due course.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next panelist, if you're working in M&A between China and the UK, you'll know Fosun very well. I think the largest private company in China. So it's a great pleasure that we've got Mr. Ling, who's the London and Lisbon rep for Fosun, and please, a couple of minutes to introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. So I work for Fosun in Portugal and UK, in charge of 2 offices. I joined Fosun 3 years ago, and my main role is to look after the investment projects and also to look for new opportunities. So Fosun, as you know, is still a young and a fast-growing private company. This year, Fosun has a 25th anniversary. And also, the group was listed in Hong Kong in 2007. That's the 10th anniversary of the listing. In the beginning, Fosun basically started as an industrial player in the pharmaceutical business, real estate, mining, travel, and steel and mining and travel. And gradually, Fosun has transformed itself into from a local player into an international player. Since 2010, Fosun started looking for opportunities in the international market. We have made investments in the UK, in the US, in Europe, UK, Asia Pacific. So now I think we are one of the most active Chinese conglomerates. Yeah.
And I'll ask Professor Yang, who's already given us a very insightful speech and his own views. Would you just like to a couple of seconds to recap yourself?
Okay, so
yeah.
So myself,
Yes,
I'm not a very interesting person. It's much better let me talk about their cases, right? Because I'm just a dean of the school for 2 years. I'm a professor in finance, corporate governance, merger acquisition. So it's not very interesting. But I really like to comment. My role is really to talk about them, not about myself. Because I'm a replacement. So I think I really like to go back to Sanpower and House of Fraser case. It's very interesting because with my international MBA student at the end of March, I was on the other side. I was in your headquarters in Nanjing, and we talk about their development and fantastic development. And as you all know, that just 2 days ago they closed another deal in U.S. in a major area of some biotech, right? So. For me, it's very interesting because I really like his case, because his case confirms what I mentioned, the M&M, because
the cake.
Yeah. So you are creating a cake thanks to Chinese M&M, because the first thing the gentleman mentioned is about the stability brought by the Chinese new shareholders by providing a more stable situation to the company to stabilize their business in UK. So which means that we don't turn the pancake into an empty plate. So this is something extremely important, and which is not always natural. I can give you a counter case that sometimes the Chinese investor will bring you not a stability, but an instability. Something happened in France, if you know, last year in June, it hit the headline. It happened in a city everybody knows, Toulouse, where you have the Airbus. And 2 years ago, a company from China, from Shandong province, Shandong Highway, did a huge investment by buying half, slightly lower, that's the French, they're very smart, slightly lower than half of the shares of the Toulouse airport company. And of course, at that time, the chairman from China was there, from Shandong Highway, and gave a very visionary, long-term oriented, as usual, like Chinese, a vision about what will happen in 10 or 15 years to double, triple the tourist transit through this airport, making the airport of Toulouse as the hub in the southern European area, whatever. And then, exactly 12 months later, there was the time for the shareholders' annual meeting. And of course, the company announced a profit of 5 million euro, so a very weak profit. But as usual, because the company made another 5 million 1 year ago, so it was not a surprise. The surprise came from the new shareholder make a proposal to make exceptional dividend distribution of 17.5 million. So which means literally they asked the company to squeeze out the retained earnings or the reserves. In different countries you have different names, that on their book to pay extraordinary dividend. So you talk long term and you act short term. So I think it's lucky for House of Fraser that the Sanpower had a quite reasonable, from your case I can learn, a financial planning that they don't gamble on a long-term investment with some short-term borrowing. Because with our assistant, we analyzed the Shandong Highway, which is a listed company, and we see they made a huge number of leverage in order to acquire the share in the airport of Toulouse. Actually, the Chinese investors brought in instability instead of stability. So I think that's a very important issue. The second one you mentioned is about the market. So here we are in a very stable market in UK or in other part of the Europe. So the population is aging. Sometimes we sit with a very brilliant brand with a history, but the market is soft. So in order to bring more value, to transform the pancake into cake, you need to bring these Chinese factors. And here you see that you work extremely well. I saw your department store in Nanjing also. So extremely well, the collaboration and also the sharing of the insights of the knowledge in order to help the new foreign acquired company into the Chinese market. So for Fosun here, I have a question. So I found occasion to ask this question. I follow their rationale of international expansion in a very close manner with Catherine and others. And I really loved one of the theory developed by your step-down vice chairman about this 20% theory. So the theory is very blunt, primitive, but it works. What they say is that Chinese population represents 20% of the world population, okay? So if they identify a product or service, okay, which is usable or is favorable in the new boom of consumption economy in China, with 20% market share there, so for them, it's an opportunity. So what they do is try to buy into that company and try to, again, like your case, to help the company into the Chinese market, like Foli, like St. John, I can mention, like Caruso Manwear. I know a lot of your cases, but there is a but. The idea behind that, they only want to play the role of financial investor. They don't want to get into the deep involvement of the management of the company, and that's why they remain minority shareholders and try to make the bridge and to create values. All these things make sense to me until one day they bought into the Club Med 100% control. So I really want to understand from you why you shift your paradigm from a minority shareholder, financial driven, into this strategic acquisition with exclusive control. And I know that in Fosun, nobody is really in the expertise to manage a holiday or vacation village. So please, thank you.
Thank you for the question. I will try. How should I say?
So I try to wake you up. If not, you will sleep.
I will try my best knowledge to answer your question, but I don't know if you will have the same answer from our chairman or from other senior people. As you know much better than me, you have mentioned a lot of cases done by Fosun. But my understanding is Fosun is an evolving entity. It's a Chinese company who has been trying to identify opportunities, not only in China, but also outside China. So this step started in 2010-11, after the financial crisis. For companies like Fosun and for other Chinese companies, I think that the right strategy is to do things step by step, in particular in the market where you are not familiar with. So looking back at the investment in Foli, and even in the beginning phase of Club Med, we did invest in minority in these companies. With our investment, Fosun was very active to introduce those concepts, those business models to China. For example, we have helped Foli open hundreds of new stores in China, and we have been also introducing Club Med models to China. Club Med has mainly resorts in developed world, in US and Europe, more than 80 resorts. Now we have helped Club Med identify more than 20 suitable places for this model. I think in the beginning, it made all the sense for me to be a minority shareholder, because it took time for you to learn the different culture, different business practice, and gradually, and with the growth of the market with the growth of your expertise and the knowledge, you can change your investment rationale or strategy, i.e. you can be more active in the post-investment operation. Fosun, actually, I think to take a minority position in an overseas project serves the purpose that we can better manage the expectation and also the strategy for those overseas companies when they look at China, when they look at analyze Chinese market, and we can save time to, how to say, like the case of Shandong Highway, to discuss with other shareholders about strategies, what should be the right, what should be done in the near future or in the midterm. So for me, I think it's a learning process, first of all. Secondly, we do realize the market in China is developing so quickly, and we do see the rising demand of the new classes, the middle class. So that's why we, with the deep roots in China, I think Fosun can play a more active role and deliver more to help those overseas companies find a position in China.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. Carrying on the pancake to cake discussion. Frank, you obviously the investment in House of Fraser was very much about the China domestic market. I mean, how do you go about ensuring that Sanpower get that impact that they want out of a UK heritage brand in China? And I think that would be a very good lesson for many other Chinese investors who are looking to do the same with their M&A deals.
Thank you. Let me actually just comment, first of all, on one of the professor's observations, which I think is very important, which is the point about Sanpower not having taken any dividends out of House of Fraser. I think that's an extraordinarily important point and very well made. It has absolutely given House of Fraser the ability to reinvest its own cash flow back into its own business. Over the first 2 years of ownership, we refurbished 20% of our stores across the UK. And that was the first store refurbishment program in the UK for probably a decade within the House of Fraser organization. So again, very, very valid point, and I think, again, one of the strengths of the ownership of Sanpower. Yep. No. No, it was based on a business plan, which was put together by the management team, saying that this lack of investment was impacting the customer experience in store. And therefore, we put a business plan to our parent company to say that we would like to commit a substantial amount of capital investment on 2 key areas: physical refurbishment of stores. Part of that was about keeping our brands, our premium brands, in store with us and investing with us. And the second was in IT. Right? We had a very substantial investment in our web platform and in our IT infrastructure to support the business. Neither of those things would have been possible without the commitment on the part of the parent to leave all of the cash in the business, generating return for the shareholder. The question.
The brand.
Back to the question on the brand. So what's very interesting about this is back to the rationale of why did Sanpower buy House of Fraser in the first place?
I think you partly answered the question, because that key piece to remember to run the business in the UK is actually
the strength of the core platform of the business in the UK is absolutely critical to expanding the brand into the China market. But if you look at what the rationale was for buying the business in the first place, Sanpower already had a domestic department store business in China. Okay. One of the key issues with Chinese department stores is they were historically run effectively as landlords. There were landlords renting out space
And therefore, the in-store experience couldn't keep pace with changing needs and requirements of the consumer. What they saw in British department store retailing was a much more experiential type of delivery of product. It was also a delivery which was based on a mix of approaches, some concession, some wholesale, and some own brands. And a lot of the department store operators operate a very similar model in the UK. And that was a model which was unfamiliar to China, and it's a model which we are now bringing to China. And very successfully so far. So we're very optimistic that re-engineering some of the Chinese department stores following that particular model is a successful, potentially successful alternative to what is currently a dying model in China at the moment. So that's the fundamental rationale, and as I say, we forge ahead.
A really good example of getting the brand right in both the UK and China and tweaking it accordingly. I'm tasked with getting us back on time as well, so we'll move on with the questions. We get lots of inquiries about M&A deals. Please find me an M&A deal. It was probably something I'm asked for by Chinese companies most weeks. They're always looking for off-market deals. They are worried about going into sort of private equity processes because they think they won't. The time frames worry them and so forth. Being off market can be very good, but also you can danger that you'll overpay. Do you see that we can help make Chinese companies more competitive in finding that initial deal? Do you think there's a lesson to be learned there? Should we be educating the Chinese companies, or should they be educating us, perhaps? Or probably a little bit of both. But Mr. Xu, if you had one or two tips on how to find that first deal to your counterparts, what would that be?
Actually, I think that's the trend for Chinese companies to try to find off-market transactions, because for Chinese companies, UK or even US are very competitive market, and sometimes we are also very concerned about the right valuation, the right price we are going to pay, and in the Western market, private equity plays always a very important role in the M&A sector. So if any companies are to be sold by private equities, you always have a very high expectation for the price valuation. That's why we are very cautious, because for a company like Fosun, we are more investor from how to say, industrial perspective rather than from pure financial perspective.
Sure.
So that's why I think the advisors, financial advisors, or accounting firms like you, like other companies, should find a way to meet this requirement coming from China.
Yep.
At the same time, I think we also need to build our own network through advisors or even through our own contacts. Because as many people mentioned, we value the relationship a lot. So if you only go to the process which you basically only know the public information and don't have much time to know the people behind and even spend time with them, it's easy to make a mistake. So for Chinese investors like us, we try to be more patient.
Yep.
By building relationship, by understanding the people and the business model and even the angle with China. So I think that's very important.
Thank you very much. Professor,
I think you touch a very important point. I remember 3 years ago when I went to Bombay House to interview Ravi Kent for his Jaguar Land Rover case, and then I went to ICE to Sally Hall to interview also the Jaguar people. And I from Ravi, I got a very interesting remark, and now we use in our teaching. He said that, Yuan, when I went to UK to acquire Jaguar Land Rover from Tata Motors, we had a double handicap. The first one is we are going from a developing country to a developed country. And secondly, we are going from low end to the high end. So, and then when he mentions that, in my mind, I say, hey, for Chinese companies, it's a triple handicap, because we have this emergent or developing to developed, we have the low end to the high end, but we also have this planned economy or perceived planned economy to a market economy. So people don't really believe all the behavior are actually market driven. So you have to overcome all these difficulties. And of course, as you mentioned also about the local knowledge, local contact. So it end up for the kind of tip to the Chinese companies is once they have made their first acquisition, and maybe it's much better later to depend on the foreign entities to expand and to do other deals. And we had, actually, Catherine, she did a case on a Chinese SOE based in Beijing, China Aviation International, very big SOE. They acquired an aircraft motor company, Continental Motors, in U.S. And then they used the U.S. vehicle to make another acquisition in Germany with less political, and of course with more reasonable price. And with another company belongs to our alumni, they acquired the leading textile machine business in Germany and Switzerland, and then they used their company based in Düsseldorf, made another acquisition in France, which was extremely successful. You don't have the Chinese etiquette, so people treat you more neutrally, and also you use the insiders in the industry. The Germans, they know very well how to value and how to take the synergy effect out of this deal. So this is extremely important. When you go direct from China, the price will easily increase another 20 to 30%. It's always the case. Just face it.
The other way around as well, of course.
Sorry?
The other way around as well, of course.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Thank you very much. We've got 5 minutes left. This was touched on in the last session, but I think I'm going to ask a similar question again because it is so important. When Angus Knowles-Cutler earlier talked about when he was at CEIBS, he'd done a session on post-merger integration, and it was a really interesting session, and it was 80% of it was a discussion about people. The headlines of M&As are always numbers and brands, but actually the success is about people, getting that management team to stay, be in place, move in the right direction. So in the last couple of minutes, can I ask you to just comment on how you keep and retain the right people and convince them to come and work for you, a new Chinese-owned British company? And Frank, perhaps you could start, please.
I'm very happy to. I suppose, having been through this more than once, I can probably comment very directly on it. I have to admit, it is not easy. It isn't easy. There are a couple of key factors that I found are important. One is absolute clarity of role and responsibility and how you fit within the new structure as a business. That goes to many dimensions. It goes to the finance function, I think, which was touched on by Philip in the previous session, making sure that there's absolute clarity as to expectations. As I said earlier on, I don't believe there's anything particularly unusual about Chinese ownership versus US ownership versus any foreign ownership. You end up as a British company having to comply with another group's reporting requirements. So, dare I say, one should just get on with it. But one needs to structure it in the right way and make sure there's absolute clarity of communication. And as I say, so I'm focusing on the finance function. I have to say, I think it's not only the finance function, it relates to the entirety of the business. The second element is in relation to incentives and long-term incentive plans. And I think this, again, is very important, is to draw clear alignment between management incentives and the ownership benefits that accrue. So I've certainly found that being absolutely clear in establishing that alignment early in the case is very helpful in making sure that everybody's motivated and pointing in the same direction. So both of those are clearly important. Communication, I think, was touched on as well. Frequency of communication. I've found that most misunderstandings happen not through language, as has been previously discussed, but actually has been through a lack of direct contact, a lack of communication. So we certainly have established at multiple levels within our organization regular video conferences with our colleagues in China. There's very clear teams, working teams established, which are cross-business. And I suppose the final element is mobility. And again, I think it was touched on by a previous speaker, Rita, I think it was, wasn't it, talking about leadership programs. We also have a group leadership program. That means that we have senior executives of the overseas businesses traveling into China, and they don't just go to head office. We move them around China. Sometimes the sessions are held in Beijing, sometimes it's Shanghai, sometimes head office. But again, that allows people to familiarize themselves with those cross-cultural differences. It's by nature that there are differences across cultures, so it's just about understanding what those differences are and familiarizing yourself with them. I would like to see more mobility, to be honest, and I have been talking to CBBC, to Lord Sassoon, I've been talking to Ambassador Liu, I've been talking to others about how we make it easier to move staff to and from our respective countries to ensure that, again, that level of familiarity is an ongoing and developing process.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I've seen the communication point is a key issue. We was involved in a deal where 6 months after the deal, the company that had been acquired phoned us up and said, we haven't been spoken to by the company in China that bought us. So we're just wondering, so that communication piece is very true. Monsieur, you own some very diverse investments from insurance companies to football clubs. So how do you maintain talent and bring the right people into those?
That's one of the success factors for cross-border M&As, in particular for companies from China. I think one of our criteria to look into any opportunity is the quality of the management team. So in most of our cases, we keep the management team because we, in the due diligence phase, we trust the people, trust the team, and that's the very important point. And then after the investment, I think it's critical to make people quickly familiar with the group, with the culture of the group, with the key person, in our case, the shareholder and the chairman of the group, so that people don't fear.
Yes.
Because people, if they
fear the unknown,
something will happen sooner or later. So that's why we have, luckily we have very open structure. In all the conference calls, chairman and the senior directors are available to talk to anybody. And also we have each year 2 conferences in Shanghai. We invite all the key people from portfolio company to Shanghai, and we try to show everything to them without hiding anything. And also our chairman and our board directors travel very often overseas.
Yes.
They go to the company, they see the people, they attend the annual conference, they talk to the employees, so that people quickly accept the new shareholder and the culture of the group.
Thank you.
So that's very important.
Thank you. It seems so.
Can I just have one point, David?
In 30 seconds.
In 30 seconds. It will literally be 30 seconds. I think it's very important, though, just to add that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to this. You shouldn't be shy of changing your management team. I think we've got to be quite careful on this, because sometimes management teams do not adapt. And that is just a fact. They sometimes, either individually or collectively, cannot or will not adapt. And one shouldn't be shy in making change where change is necessary. However, we certainly find that where change has been made, making that change and maintaining consistency of the Western management approach for those Western companies is important.
Thank you very much. Okay, with great thanks to CEIBS for bringing such a great event to Deloitte today, and with a great thanks to our illustrious panel, I'll end it there. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the CEIBS China Knowledge Podcast. Keep up with business in China by subscribing on iTunes U or through your favorite podcast app. China Europe International Business School has campuses and teaching facilities in China, in Shanghai, Beijing, and Shenzhen, as well as Africa in Accra, Ghana, and in Europe in Zurich, Switzerland. The CEIBS MBA program is ranked number 1 in Asia and 11th in the world by the Financial Times 2017 Global MBA ranking. CEIBS is the bridge that connects the world and China.